I have just been meeting with my national security team on today's tragic events in the Middle East, and I would like to make a brief statement. First, as you know, an explosion claimed the lives of at least 4 sailors on one of our naval vessels, the USS Cole, this morning. Many were injured, a number are still missing. They were simply doing their duty. The ship was refueling in a port in Yemen while en route to the Persian Gulf. We are rushing medical assistance to the scene, and our prayers are with the families who have lost their loved ones or are still awaiting news. If, as it now appears, this was an act of terrorism, it was a despicable and cowardly act. We will find out who was responsible and hold them accountable. If their intention was to deter us from our mission of promoting peace and security in the Middle East, they will fail utterly. I have directed the Department of Defense, the FBI, and the State Department to send officials to Yemen to begin the investigation. Secretary Albright has spoken with President Saleh of Yemen, and we expect to work closely with his government to that effect. Our military forces and our embassies in the region have been on heightened state of alert for some time now. I have ordered our ships in the region to pull out of port and our land forces to increase their security. Tensions are extremely high today throughout the entire region, as all of you know. I strongly condemn the murder of Israeli soldiers in Ramallah today. While I understand the anguish Palestinians feel over the losses they have suffered, there can be no possible justification for mob violence. I call on both sides to undertake a ceasefire immediately, and immediately to condemn all acts of violence. Finally, let me say this. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the greatest tragedies and most difficult problems of our time, but it can be solved. The progress of the last few years, progress that brought Israel to the hope of a final peace with true security, and Palestinians to the hope of a sovereign state recognized by the entire world, was not made through violence. It happened because both sides sat down together, negotiated, and slowly built up the trust that violence destroys. Now is the time to stop the bloodshed, to restore calm, to return to dialogue, and ultimately to the negotiating table. The alternative to the peace process is now no longer merely hypothetical. It is unfolding today before our very eyes. Now, I need to go back to work on this, and so I won't take questions right now, but the Department of Defense will offer a briefing today, and we'll be able to answer the questions that are relevant to today's events. Thank you.
After the East Africa embassy bombings of 1998, al-Qaeda leader Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri calls a number in Yemen to discuss attacking the U.S. warship. Al-Nashiri will go on to have a prominent role in the attacks allegedly against the USS Sullivans in January 3rd of 2000 in Yemen. U.S. authorities learned of this call no later than December of 2000, although it is not clear how they do so. The number called by al-Nashiri is not disclosed by the media, but some of al-Nashiri's associates lived at an al-Qaeda communications hub in Sana'a, Yemen, which began to be monitored by U.S. authorities around the time of 1996 and 1998. In the summer of 1999, Khalid bin Attash, an al-Qaeda operative, was sent to Yemen to help al-Qaeda leader Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri obtain explosives to bomb a ship and also to get a U.S. visa so he can travel to the United States to take part in an operation there. 3 future 9/11 hijackers get a U.S. visa around this time, but bin Attash has more trouble, apparently because he is Yemeni and the others are Saudi. While there, bin Attash is arrested by Yemeni authorities. Bin Laden finds out about the arrest and is concerned that bin Attash might reveal the ship bombing and U.S. operations while under interrogation. Bin Laden contacts a Yemeni official and makes a deal, offering not to attack Yemen if the Yemeni government does not confront them and releases bin Attash in the summer of 1999. Both sides agree to the deal, and bin Attash returns to Afghanistan without revealing either plot. There is another piece of evidence that Yemeni officials will help al-Nashiri as the ship attack plot eventually targets the USS Cole while stationed in Yemen. During this time, future 9/11 hijacker Khalid al-Mihdhar tells another operative that al-Qaeda is planning a ship bombing attack. The U.S. will learn this from a detainee interviewed in December of 2001. The detainee will say that al-Mihdhar informed him that al-Qaeda operative al-Nashiri was the plot's organizer. Al-Nashiri discussed the ship bombing attack in a telephone call made in late 1998. The call may have been to the al-Qaeda communications hub at which al-Mihdhar lived, but may also have been picked up by the United States NSA. Al-Qaeda soon attempts to attack the USS Sullivans in Aden, Yemen, but the plan fails. Al-Mihdhar, who will be accused of participating in the plot to bomb the USS Cole in Yemen, travels to Yemen shortly before the attack on the Sullivans and apparently leaves one day after it. On January 3rd of 2000, an al-Qaeda attack on the USS Sullivans in Aden, Yemen harbor fails when their boat filled with explosives sink. This is one of a series of failed al-Qaeda attacks planned to take place around the turn of the millennium. But the attack remains undiscovered, and a duplication of the attack by the same people will successfully hit the USS Cole in the future. The United States will first learn of the planned attack on the Sullivans while interrogating a suspect in the Cole bombing in November of 2000. Between January 8th and 15th, while in Thailand, future 9/11 hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, an associate with three other of the operatives who will later be involved in the bombing of the USS Cole. The two hijackers arrived with Khalid bin Attash. The three of them come from Malaysia, where they were under surveillance by the CIA. While in Bangkok, bin Attash meets Cole bombers Fahad al-Kuso and Ibrahim al-Thawar, who give bin Attash some money, possibly $36,000. Some of this may be passed to al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar. Under interrogation after 9/11, bin Attash will claim that even though they all stay in the same hotel for part of the time, the two groups do not meet. However, such statements are thought to be unreliable because of the methods used to extract them under the SEER CIA program. Some photographs of al-Hazmi and al-Mihdhar after 9/11 by the FBI, al-Kuso will say that he recognizes the two, but indicate that this may be because he met them at camps in Afghanistan. However, he is apparently photographed by Malaysian authorities standing next to al-Mihdhar in Kuala Lumpur under the authorization of the Central Intelligence Agency. In April of 2000, Yemen's Interior Minister, Hussein Arab, issues a letter to al-Qaeda commander Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri, instructing Yemeni authorities to give safe passage to al-Nashiri and three bodyguards without being searched or intercepted. The letter states that all security forces are instructed to cooperate with him and facilitate his mission. Al-Nashiri's mission turns out to be the attacks on the USS Cole, in which 17 sailors would be killed later. Arab will be removed from his position in April of 2001, but the letter will not come to light until after the Cole trial in Yemen in 2004, when it is read out loud in court by the defense. Jamal Amir, editor of the weekly Al-Wasat, will comment that the letter proves that there is a link between the security authorities and these groups. In May of 2001, the UPI will report, according to several U.S. government sources, one of the reasons the attack on the Cole succeeded was involvement by the highest levels of the Yemen government of President Ali Abdullah Saleh, although Saleh himself personally was not, one said. By mid-September of 2000, a videotape message featuring Osama bin Laden calling for more attacks on the United States is aired on Al Jazeera. The video ends with al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri saying, "Enough of words. It is time to take action against the iniquitous and faithless force of the United States, which has spread troops through Egypt, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia." Further, bin Laden is wearing a distinctive curved Yemeni dagger. Author Lawrence Wright will later mention in the book The Looming Tower that this was a teasing clue similar to other clues he had left before attacks. Defense Intelligence Agency analyst Kai Follis later would recall, every time he put on one of these videotapes, it was a signal that action was coming. He claims that after hearing of the video, he knew then that it would be within a month or two that an attack would be upcoming. But nonetheless, his suggestion to put out on a general attack warning will go unheeded. An al-Qaeda attack on the USS Cole follows less than a month later. In late September of 2000, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer will later claim that Captain Scott Philpott, leader of the Able Danger program, briefs General Peter Shoemaker, head of the Special Operations Command, or SOCOM, that Able Danger has uncovered information of increased al-Qaeda activity in Aden Harbor, Yemen. Schaefer, plus two other officials familiar with Able Danger, later tell the New York Post that this warning was gleaned through a search of bin Laden's business ties. Schaefer later recalls, Yemen was elevated by Able Danger to be one of the top 3 hotspots for al-Qaeda in the entire world. This warning, plus another possibly connected warning from Defense Intelligence Agency analyst Kai Follis, go unheeded, and no official warning is issued. The USS Cole is attacked by al-Qaeda terrorists in Aden Harbor weeks later. Schaefer later claims that Philpott tells the 9/11 Commission about this warning in 2004 to show that Able Danger could have had a significant impact. But the Commission's findings failed to mention the warning or, in fact, anything else about Able Danger. Pennsylvania Representative Kurt Weldon will similarly tell Fox News that 2 weeks before the attack on the Cole, in fact, 2 days before the attack on the Cole, Able Danger saw an increase of activity that led them to say to the senior leadership in the Pentagon at that time in the Clinton administration that there's something going to happen in Yemen and we better be on high alert. But it was discounted. That story has yet to be told to the American people. October 12th, 2000. The USS Cole is bombed in the Aden, Yemen harbor by 2 al-Qaeda militants, Hassan al-Kamiri and Ibrahim al-Thawar. 17 U.S. soldiers are killed and 37 are wounded. The CIA will later conclude that with just slightly more skilled execution, the attack would have killed 300 and sunk the ship. The Islamic Army of Aden immediately takes credit for the attack. This is a Yemen-based Muslim militant group widely believed to have close ties to al-Qaeda. The statement is released by ex-spokesman Abu Hamza al-Masri. Abu Hamza says that the attack was timed to mark the anniversary of the execution of the group's former commander. The Prime Minister of Yemen at the time of the bombing will say shortly after 9/11, the Islamic Army was part of al-Qaeda. The United States soon learns that the names of some of the al-Qaeda operatives involved in the attack included Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Tawfiq bin Atash, and Fahad al-Quso, as well as Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri and Future 9/11 facilitator Ramzi bin al-Shibh may also have been involved. This is a repeat of a previously attempted attack against the USS Sullivans, which failed. The 9/11 Commission will later say that the Cole bombing was a full-fledged al-Qaeda operation supervised directly by bin Laden. He chose the target and location of the attack, selected the suicide operatives, and provided the money needed to purchase explosives and equipment. On October 12th of 2000, author Lawrence Wright will later write about the FBI's investigation of the USS Cole bombing in Yemen. Quote, the FBI was convinced that the Cole bombers had been tipped off about the arrival of the Cole and that they wanted to expand the investigation to include a member of the president's own family and a colonel in the Yemeni equivalent of the FBI. There was scant interest on the part of the Yemeni authorities in pursuing such leads, end quote. Wright will also point out that Yemen was a particularly difficult place to start a terrorist investigation, as it was filled with active al-Qaeda cells and with sympathizers at the very high levels of government. On television, Yemeni politicians called for jihad against America. Just getting permission from the Yemeni government to go to the crime scene, the wounded warship in the Aden harbor, required lengthy negotiations with hostile officials. Cooperation from the Yemeni government is erratic at best. For instance, the Yemenis eventually show the FBI a videotape taken by a harborside security camera, but it appears the moment of the explosion has been edited out. Later, when the FBI is finally allowed to interview Fahad al-Qusso, who the FBI believes is one of the main Cole plotters, a Yemeni colonel enters the room and kisses Qusso on both cheeks. This is recognized signal to everyone that al-Qusso is protected. Between Yemeni obstructions, infighting between U.S. officials, and security concerns hindering movement, there will never be the same kind of investigation and trial as there was with the U.S. Embassy bombings of 1998. Between October 14th and late November, the first FBI agents enter Yemen 2 days after the bombing of the USS Cole in an attempt to discover who was responsible. However, the main part of the team initially gets stuck in Germany because they do not have permission to enter Yemen, and they are then unable to accomplish much due to the restrictions placed on them and tensions between lead investigator John O'Neill, head of the counterterrorism unit of the FBI in New York, and U.S. Ambassador to Yemen, Barbara Bodine. All but about 50 investigators are forced to leave by the end of October. O'Neill's boss, Barry Maughan, visits to assess the situation. Maughan will later comment, it became clear Bodine simply hated John O'Neill. After a 10-day investigation, he concludes, O'Neill is doing a fine job and tells Bodine that she is O'Neill's only detractor and refuses her request to recall him. But O'Neill and much of his team are pressured to leave by late November, and Bodine will not give him permission to return any time after that. The investigation stalls without his personal relationships to top Yemeni officials. Increased security threats forced the reduction FBI team still in Yemen to withdraw altogether by June of 2001. The Prime Minister of Yemen at that time later claims that hijacker Khalid al-Mihdhar was one of the Cole perpetrators involved in the preparations. He was in Yemen at the time and stayed with the Cole bombing for a while, then he left. The Sunday Times would later note, the failure in Yemen may have blocked off lines of investigation that could have led directly to the terrorists preparing for September 11th. By late October, Fahad al-Qusso, who was a known associate of Osama bin Laden, turns himself in to the Yemeni government after some of his relatives are questioned in the wake of the USS Cole bombing. He admits that he and one of the two Cole suicide bombers went to Bangkok, Thailand, and gave several $1,000s to a man known as Khalad, who later would be Taufaq bin Attash, who was identified as one of the masterminds of the Cole bombing. He says the money is to buy a new artificial leg for the one-legged Khalad. The transcripts of the interrogation is given to the FBI a month later. FBI agent Ali Soufan sees the transcript and remembers a source he recruited in Afghanistan who spoke of a one-legged man named Khalad who was close to bin Laden. Khalad is his nickname. A mugshot of bin Attash is sent to this source, who makes a positive identification. Khalad is Taufaq bin Attash. And Soufan wondered why money was being sent away from the Cole plotters and away from Yemen prior to a major planned attack, and speculates that it may mean another al-Qaeda operation is being planned somewhere else. Soufan would ask the CIA for information about Khalad and this other attack, which turned out to be later 9/11. But the CIA withholds this information. And Al-Quso will later reveal more to the FBI, leading to more missed opportunities. Based on information from interviews of suspects detained during the USS Cole bombings, the FBI finds that one of the leading bombers was Khalad bin Attash, who was involved also with the 1998 East Africa bombings. The detained men, Jamal al-Badawi and Fahad al-Quso, say that they are recently traveled to Afghanistan and met bin Attash there. Al-Badawi also says that bin Attash helped purchase a boat used in the Cole bombing. The head of the FBI's investigation, Ali Soufan, was startled by this news, as an informer had already provided information on bin Attash, describing him as one of bin Laden's top lieutenants. Although the FBI wants to interview the two detained men to obtain more information, the Yemeni authorities refused at this point, saying that they both sworn on the Quran they would not be involved in the attack, so they must be innocent. Limited access to Al-Quso will be granted to the FBI later, but the Yemeni authorities will indicate to him that he is still under their protection. By January of 2001, the CIA's Counterterrorist Center completes a report on the bombing of the USS Cole. This report, drafted by CIA officer Clark Shannon, finds that Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda are circumstantially tied to the attack. However, the report fails to mention details known to the CIA involving figures later connected to the 9/11 plot. The Justice Department's Office of Inspector General will later observe the report did not mention hijacker Khalid al-Midar's visa, hijacker Nawaf al-Hazmi's travel to the United States, or Khalad bin Attash's identification from the Kuala Lumpur photographs. By January 5th of 2001, after an informer, later referred to as Omar, tells the CIA that an al-Qaeda leader, Khalad bin Attash, was at al-Qaeda's Malaysia summit meeting, the CIA fails to communicate this information to the FBI, even though it is important for the FBI's investigation of the USS Cole bombing and connections between future 9/11 hijackers, Khalid al-Midar and Nawaf al-Hazmi, to the Cole bombers. Omar is a joint FBI-CIA source, but the FBI assistant legal attaché responsible for him, Michael Doris, will later say he does not know of this identification, and documentation he drafts at this time indicates that he is unaware of it. It is unclear why Doris is unaware of the identification, although he does not speak Omar's language and may have been out of the room making photocopies when Omar identified bin Attash in a photo of the Malaysian summit for his CIA counterpart. That officer, known only as Chris, will later say he has no independent recollection of any particular meeting with Omar. However, when Omar previously identified a photo of Benatash provided by Yemeni authorities on December 16, 2000, Chris had him repeat the identification specifically for the benefit of Doris. And the cable he drafted about the meeting said this clearly. In addition, Doris will later say that he recalls the specific circumstances of the previous debriefing and would be able to recount them, including the identification of Benatash in the photograph provided by the Yemenis. Chris drafts 3 cables about the January 4th meeting. One internal cable provides little detail about it, but says Benatash was identified in one of the photos. A cable to the general U.S. intelligence community fails to mention the identification of Benatash, as does a third cable, which is sent to the CIA. However, according to statements made by CIA officials after 9/11, at this time, the CIA thinks that the FBI knows that Benatash had been identified in the photos. For example, Director of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, Cofer Black, will tell the 9/11 congressional inquiry, quote, "Our records establish that the special agents from the FBI's New York field office who were investigating the USS Cole attack reviewed the information about the Kuala Lumpur photo in late 2001, end quote. However, there is no documentary record of information about the second identification placing Benatash in Kuala Lumpur with the 2 hijackers being passed to the FBI at this time. In addition, in July of 2001, CIA manager and deputy chief of Alex Station, Tom Wilshire, will suggest passing this information to the FBI, possibly meaning he thinks it is not passed at this time. The CIA will not notify the FBI that Omar identified Benatash in the photo until August 30th, 2001, less than 2 weeks before the 9/11 attacks. On January 30th, 2001, the Bush White House holds its first National Security Council meeting. The focus is on Iraq and the Israeli-Palestine conflict. This meeting sets the tone for how President Bush intends to handle foreign affairs. Counterterrorism Chief Richard Clarke wants to discuss the focus on the threat from al-Qaeda and Islamist terrorism, especially in the light of the recent attack on the USS Cole. However, Bush isn't interested in terrorism. Instead, President Bush channels his neoconservative advisors, particularly incoming Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz, in taking a new approach to Middle East affairs, particularly the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Referring to President Clinton's efforts to make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, Bush declared, "Clinton overreached and it all fell apart. That's why we're in trouble. If the two sides don't want peace, there's no way we can force them. I don't see much we can do over there at this point. I think it's time to pull out of the situation. We're going to correct the imbalance of the previous administration on the Middle East conflict. We're going to tilt back towards Israel." His view is that the Israeli government, currently headed by Ariel Sharon, should be left alone to deal how it sees fit with the Palestinians. Bush would go on to say, "I'm not going to go past reputations when it comes to Sharon. I'm going to take him at face value. We'll work on a relationship based on how things go." Justifying his position, he recalled a recent trip he took to Israel with the Republican Jewish coalition. "We flew over the Palestinian camps. Looked real bad down there. I don't see much we can do over there at this point." Secretary of State Colin Powell, surprised by Bush's intended policy toward the 50-year-old Israeli-Palestinian conflict, objects. According to Secretary of Treasury Paul O'Neill, Powell stressed that a pullback by the United States would unleash Sharon and the Israeli army. When Powell warned the president that the consequences of that policy could be dire, especially for the Palestinians, Bush shrugs. Sometimes a show of strength by one side can really clarify things. The meeting then moved on to the subject of Iraq. Condoleezza Rice would begin noting that Iraq might be the key to reshaping the entire region. She turned the meeting over to CIA Director George Tenet, who summarizes current intelligence on Iraq. He mentioned that a factory might be producing either chemical or biological materials for weapon manufacture. The evidence he provided is a picture of the factory with some truck activity, a water tower, and railroad tracks going into a building. He admits that there is no confirming intelligence on just what is going on at these sites. However, Bush would order Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld and Joint Chiefs of Staff General Hugh Shelton to begin preparing options for the use of U.S. ground forces in Iraq, northern and southern no-fly zones, in support of a native-based insurgency against the Hussein regime. Author Ron Suskind would later sum up the discussion, meeting adjourned. 10 days in, and it was about Iraq. Rumsfeld had said little. Cheney, nothing at all, though both men clearly had long entertained the idea of overthrowing Saddam. Defense Intelligence Agency official Patrick Lang would later write, "If this was a decision meeting, it was strange. It ended in a presidential order to prepare contingency plans for war in Iraq." U.S. Secretary of Treasury Paul O'Neill would later recall, from the very beginning, there was a conviction that Saddam Hussein was a bad person and that he needed to go. From the very first instance, it was about Iraq. It was about what we could do to change this regime. Day one, these things were laid and sealed. O'Neill will say officials never questioned the logic behind this policy. No one ever dare ask, why Saddam and why now? Instead, the issue that needed to be resolved was how this could be accomplished. It was all about finding a way to do it. That was the tone of it. The president saying, go find me a way to do this. On June 11, 2001, the FBI and the CIA hold a meeting to discuss the investigation into USS Cole bombing and a possible connection between it and al-Qaeda's Malaysia summit. However, the CIA and FBI headquarters refuse to share all they know, and agents investigating the Cole bombing become angry over this. The meeting, which lasts between 2 and 4 hours, is attended by CIA case officer Clark Shannon, FBI headquarters agent Dina Corsi, and FBI agent loaned to the CIA named Margaret Gillespie, FBI agent Steve Bongart, FBI agent Russell Fincher, and Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kelly. Although there was no agenda for the meeting, and Corsi will later say it is a brainstorming session, author Lawrence Wright will say that one of the reasons for the meeting is that CIA officer Tom Wilshire, an associate of Shannon's, wanted to know what the FBI knew about al-Qaeda's Malaysia summit. FBI agent Ali Soufan will also say that he later learned that Wilshire was fishing to see if the FBI knew anything about the men in the photos. Initially, Bongart and Fincher briefed Shannon on progress in the Cole investigation. Corsi then shows the two Cole investigators the 3 photographs taken at al-Qaeda's Malaysia summit in 2000, showing future 9/11 hijackers Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi and another man. Shannon asks if the agents recognize Fahad al-Quso, who is thought to have attended the Malaysia summit and had been interviewed by the FBI. However, one of the photos shows Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hazmi, and a tree. And the CIA has already recognized al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi. So it is unclear how the Cole investigators are supposed to recognize al-Quso in the photo. Corsi received the photographs from Wilshire, but Wilshire did not provide her with all the relevant information about them. Bongart and Fincher ask who is in the pictures, why they were taken, and whether there are other photos of the meeting. However, Shannon refuses to say, but Corsi eventually admits one of the men is named Khalid al-Mihdhar. As a name alone is not sufficient reason to start an investigation, Bongard asks for a date of birth or other details that would allow him to know which Khalid al-Mihdhar in the world is being discussed. But Shannon refuses to provide them. Shannon admits that al-Mihdhar was traveling on a Saudi passport and then leaves the meeting. Lawrence Wright will later say that providing a date of birth is standard procedure, the first thing most investigators would do. Realizing that the photos pertain to the Cole investigation, Bongard and Fincher become angry at the lack of information being provided, and the meeting descends into a shouting match. Shannon would later admit that at this time, he knew al-Mihdhar had a U.S. visa, that al-Hazmi had traveled to the United States in 2000, that al-Qaeda leader Khalid bin Attash had been recognized in one of the photos, and that al-Hazmi was known to be an experienced operative. However, he does not tell any of this to any of the FBI agents in the meeting, as he apparently thinks he does not have the authority. However, he would contradict himself before the 9/11 Commission and tells them that he did have the authority, but he does not tell them. He does not let them keep copies of the photos either, and will give conflicting accounts to other people as well. Dina Corsi had NSA information saying al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi attended the Malaysia meeting, but apparently believes that the Cole agents cannot be told more because of restrictions on sharing intelligence with criminal agents. However, one of the Cole agents present is an intelligence agent, so the information can be communicated to him immediately without Corsi obtaining permission from the NSA or Justice Department. In addition, the NSA sent the information to the FBI's New York field office, where the Cole investigators are based. Furthermore, when she asks the NSA's permission to share the information 10 weeks later, the NSA approves the request on the same day. She does not share the information at this time, but promises Bongard and Fincher to try and do so later. The Cole agents will not receive more information for months. 2 days after this meeting, Khalid al-Mihdhar has no trouble getting a new, multiply re-entry U.S. visa. In August of 2001, former CIA case officer agent for Middle East, Robert Baer, is advising a prince in a Persian Gulf royal family when a military associate of this prince passes information to him about a spectacular terrorist operation that will take place shortly. He is given a computer record of around 600 secret al-Qaeda operatives in Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The list includes 10 names that will be placed on the FBI's most wanted terrorist list after 9/11. He is also given evidence that a Saudi merchant family had funded the USS Cole bombing, and that the Yemeni government is covering up information related to that bombing. At the military officer's request, he offers all this information to the Saudi Arabian government. However, an aide to the Saudi defense minister's Prince Sultan refuses to look at the list or to pass on the names. Sultan is later sued for his complicity in the 9/11 plot in August of 2002. Baer also passes the information on to senior CIA official and the CIA's Counterterrorism Center, but there was no response or action. Portions of Baer's book describing his experience will be blacked out, having been censored by the CIA. Later, President Bill Clinton declared, "As if it now appears this was an act of terrorism, it was a despicable and cowardly act. We will find out who is responsible and find them accountable." During the course of the investigation, numerous people were detained. Some were arrested. Some were sent to CIA black sites. Some were not. Some were tortured by Yemeni authorities, and some were protected. the blame was placed on al-Qaeda. Both Clinton and his successor, George Bush, have been criticized for failing to respond militarily to the attack on the Cole before September 11, 2001. The 9/11 Commission report would later cite one source who said in February of 2001 that bin Laden complained frequently that the United States had not attacked in response to the Cole. Bin Laden wanted the United States to attack, and if it did not, he would launch something bigger. Later, author and geopolitical expert Scott Horton would become prophetic in calling bin Laden a military commander and expert regarding the same quote back over the years in two books, Fool's Errand and Time to End the War in Afghanistan. Evidence of al-Qaeda's involvement was inconclusive for months after the attack. The staff of the 9/11 Commission found that al-Qaeda's direction of the bombing was under investigation, but increasingly clear on November 11, 2000. It was an unproven assumption in late November. And by December 21st, the CIA had made a preliminary judgment that al-Qaeda appeared to have supported the attack without a definitive conclusion. Accounts, therefore, are varied and somewhat contradictory. Even when National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice told the Commission that when the administration took office on January 20th, 2001, she said, "We knew that there was speculation that the 2000 Cole attack was al-Qaeda. We received, I think, on January 25th, the same assessment that it was preliminary. It was not clear," end quote. One report stated that 6 days after Bush took office, the FBI believed they had clear evidence tying the bombers to al-Qaeda. These conclusions are contrasted by testimony of key figures before the 9/11 Commission, summarized in the final report. Former CIA Director George Tenet later testified on page 196 that he believed he laid out what was notable early in the investigation and that the evidence never really changed until after 9/11. The report suggested on pages 201 that the official assessment was similarly vague until at least March of 2001. On September 29th, 2004, a Yemeni judge sentenced Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri and Jamal al-Badawi to death for their roles in the bombing. Al-Nashiri, believed to be the operations mastermind, was detained by the United States at Guantanamo Bay. Al-Badawi, in Yemeni custody, denounced the verdict as an American one. 4 others were sentenced to prison terms of 5 to 10 years for their involvement, including one Yemeni who had videotaped the attack. On February 3rd, 2006, 23 suspected or convicted al-Qaeda members escaped from jail in Yemen. This number included 13 who were convicted of the bombings of the USS Cole and the French tanker, the MV Lindbergh, in 2002. Among those who reportedly escaped was al-Badawi. Al-Qaeda's Yemeni number 2, Abu Asam al-Madhawi, may have also escaped. On October 17, 2007, al-Badawi surrendered to Yemeni authorities as part of an agreement with al-Qaeda militants. Following his surrender, Yemeni authorities released him in return for a pledge not to engage in any violent or al-Qaeda-related activity, despite a $5 million reward for his capture. 2 other escapees remained at large. In June of 2008, the United States charged Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri with planning and conducting the attack. The United States planned to seek the death penalty in his case. And on February 5th, 2009, the United States dropped all charges against al-Nashiri without prejudice to comply with President Obama's order to shut down the military prison at Guantanamo Bay, but reserved the right to file charges at a later date. At a 2007 hearing in a military court, al-Nashiri attributed his confessions of his involvement with the USS Cole bombing to torture, which included waterboarding by CIA officials. The details of torture that Nashiri offered at the hearing were redacted from the transcript. Through Freedom of Information Act requests, the American Civil Liberties Union was able to acquire less redacted versions of the transcripts from al-Rahim al-Nashiri's Combatant Status Review Tribunal and those of 3 other captives. In his opening statement, al-Nashiri listed 7 false confessions he had been coerced to make while being waterboarded. The French merchant vessel Limburg incident, the USS Cole bombing, the rockets in Saudi Arabia, the plan to bomb American ships in the Gulf, Osama bin Laden having a nuclear bomb, relationship with people committing bombings in Saudi Arabia, and a plan to hijack a plane and crash it into a ship. Al-Nashiri was tortured under the supervision of then current director of the CIA, Gina Haspel. A Naval Reserve doctor who interviewed him described him as one of the most severely traumatized individuals I have ever seen. In August of 2018, cables from the secret detention site overseen by Haspel, dating from November 2002 and likely authorized by, if not written by her, were released because of a Freedom of Information lawsuit that they described the tortures of al-Nashiri in detail, including slamming him against a wall, confining him to a small box, waterboarding him, depriving him of sleep and clothing, as well as threatening to turn him over to others who would kill him and calling him a little girl, a spoiled little rich Saudi, and a sissy. During the course of the tribunal, he claimed to have made additional confessions under the duress of torture. He was ostensibly the last of the al-Qaeda suspects to be videotaped as he was waterboarded in Thailand by CIA officers who questioned him. Shortly after, when the prisoner died in CIA custody in Iraq, the government agents decided against videotaping such interrogations, as this provided criminal evidence if things went wrong. All the CIA tapes showing detainees being waterboarded were destroyed in 2005. On February 5th, 2009, all of Nashiri's charges were withdrawn without prejudice. However, in 2011, the charges were reinstated. On May 8, 2012, Ali Soufan, al-Nashiri's original FBI interrogator, asked whether a recently published book by former CIA official Jose Rodriguez would undermine al-Nashiri's prosecution. Rodriguez was in overall charge of the CIA's extended interrogation program. According to Soufan, Rodriguez's account of al-Nashiri's role in the Cole bombing differed markedly from that of the prosecution. Rodriguez disputed that al-Nashiri had been the bombing's mastermind and agreed with a colleague who characterized him as the dumbest terrorist I had ever met. To this day, al-Nashiri continues to be in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. In 2014, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Poland violated the European Convention on Human Rights when it cooperated with the CIA and the state officials at the United States State Department by allowing the CIA to hold and torture al-Nashiri and Abu Zubaydah on its territory between the years 2002 and 2003. The court ordered the Polish government to pay each of the men €100,000 in damages. In May 31st, 2018, in the case of al-Nashiri versus Romania, the court claimed Romania was complicit in the CIA rendition and had suffered from various ECR-HR violations. There is no set trial date for the Guantanamo Bay detainees, Tawfiq Benatash and Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri. It has been 21 years since the attack on the USS Cole and 20 since the attacks of September 11, 2001. With all the detainees suspected of being behind both attacks being victim to the Central Intelligence Agency's enhanced interrogation program, which were conducted at CIA black sites in countries like Romania, Poland, and Iraq. The confessions made by Benatash and al-Nashiri, as well as the rest, are now currently described as inadmissible due to the fact they were made under duress. The prosecutors know this, the courts know this, the world knows this. But did the CIA know this beforehand? Did they know that by prescribing the use of torture of detainees, that their admissions would not be used against them? Or did they believe that they could prevent future attacks from taking place? Or did they simply do it because they were given the authorization from the Bush White House to implement the program as they see fit? While the Shiite Arab world comes under attack for the crimes which are just as fictitious as the confessions made under violence by CIA officials, the travesty of justice continues for the victims of the USS Cole, the September 11th attacks, and for the Shia Arab world whole.